Hey there. So we're reducing the CPM lessons per week, and I still wanted to kind of keep up with that mental math problem. So as a different day part, I'm going to do some percent parts. We have this percent section or whatever that we're going to do for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks or so. Just one lesson a week, and we're going to build upon those lessons each one. So this one's just kind of an introduction, and the goal of this one is to find easy values, percents of numbers, right? That's our goal for this one. So we're going to start at a relatively simple problem, and then next week we'll do some additional stuff, and we'll just keep moving it up. I have 6 examples here that I want to go over. And then from those 6 examples, you have about 14 problems to do for your own work. Be sure to show your work so that you demonstrate that it's not just the answers that you revealed, but that you did the work yourself. Okay? So the very first one that I have up here is what is 1% of, 56? So what is that 1% of 56? Well, we do have to remember a couple of different items. 1% is 1%, right? And from earlier in the year, we had just talked about this so much when we did the portions webs, right? The portions webs that look like this. 1% is 1 per cent, or 1 per 100, because cent represents 100, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite these percents as a fraction in this case. We could also write this as a decimal. 1 out of 100 is 1/100th, or we could write that as 0.01. Okay. So we have 1%, and we have it as a fraction in a decimal. So what is 1% of 56? So 1% of 56 is 1%, or 1/100th of 56. And all we're going to do is just perform that multiplication. And that's what I want you guys to show, or for you guys to do. We have to write that over 1. This becomes 1 times 56, right? 1 times 56. Although you don't have to show this step, I'm just showing it as a reminder. 100 times 1, and that equals 56 over 100, right? Now, that's 56 hundredths. And what we can actually do is put that as a decimal. Now, let's just show that division here on the side. We could take that 56, and we could, I guess we could write it as a fraction. I think that I would maybe I should see both for this one. I just had that realization. So we could reduce that, right? We could divide them both by 2. If we divide these both by 2, we would get something over 50 here, and then we would just take that 56, and we'd have to divide that by 2 also, right? 56 divided by 2, 28. And I look at that and I say, holy cow, we can divide that by 2 again, can't we? So let's divide it by 2. 14 out of 25. Whoops. And that would be the smallest that fraction could be. We could also write that as a decimal by simply taking that 56 and dividing it by 100. Now, this might at first seem like a lot of extra work, but I think what you're going to see is the whole point by the end of this is it's going to go a lot quicker. So how many hundreds go into 50? 6, 0. How many go in? Hundreds go into 5, 0. How many hundreds go into 56? 0. So let's move our decimal place up. How many 100s go into 560? That's 5. We subtract, and we got our 60 here. We got to drop 1 0 down. How many 100s go into 600? 6, right? And this part really should not be a surprise right here. And the reason it shouldn't be is because this is 56 hundredths, and that's what we have here, 56 hundredths, right? So we should know that that is 0.56. Okay? So what are the two answers from this? ultimately, this is the answer I would hope for, and that this would be okay also. Okay. Now, let's go further here. Okay, so what's 10%? 10%, there we go, 10 per 100 of 32, right? Well, that's going to be 320 out of 100. And we could do that division over here, right? 100 over 320. And how many hundreds go into 3? 0. How many hundreds go into 32? None. How many hundreds go into 320? 3 of them. 3 times 100 is 300. And we subtract. We have a 20 here. Drop the 0 down. How many 100s go into? We should move our decimal up. How many 100s go into 200? 2. 2 times 100 is 200. Excellent news. There we go. 3.2, right? 3.2. And ultimately, I think that would be our best direction to keep that going. So that would equal 3.2. Here we have the exact same thing, but it's just written slightly different. 10% of 61, right? 10 of 61. And we get 10 into 61. Or 10 times 61, sorry about that, is 610. And there's my 100. Divide that, right? 100 into 610. And how many 100s go into 610? That would be 6. And we subtract. Whoops, I already dropped my 0 down, didn't I? How many hundreds go into 100? 1, right? 61. 6.1. Sorry about that. Okay. Now let's just take a moment to just stop and reflect on this, okay? What are we actually calculating? Well, remember that this is 1%, and what I'm looking for is what is 1/100th of 56. So if I could take 56 and divide it into 100 equal pieces, one of those pieces would be 0.56, right? 0.56. So what if I could take 32, divide it into 100 pieces, and I wanted it 10 out of those 100 pieces? What is that? That is 3.2. Okay. In this case, if I had 61 items, right, and I have those 61 items, and I divide it into 100 pieces, but I wanted how many 10 of them would be, what do I get? 6.1, right? So all we're doing is we're taking these numbers, dividing it into 100 pieces, and finding out what either one of them or 10 of them would be, whatever it happens to be, right? But let's also not forget that there's shortcuts here, right? And if you recognize these shortcuts, you're free to use some of these shortcuts, right? 1% is 1/100th. No, I might probably grab a different color here. It's 1/100th of something. Well, notice all we did is we shifted that decimal place over 2 spots, right? It was a 56. And then when we moved it over, it was 1, 2, right? Because we divided by 100. How about this one? Well, this one we just moved the 32, moved the decimal place over once. But how do we see that? Well, keep in mind, what is that number? That is 1/10, right? 10 out of 100 is 1/10. So I moved it over one place. That's like dividing it by 10, right? 1 over 10 times 32 over 1 is 32 divided by 10, right? There's that move over one decimal place. So 10% of 61 should allow us, right? This is 1/10. Just move the decimal place over 1. And there it is, right? And there it is. Okay, so now what's 1% of 88? Well, this is 1/100th, right? And if it's 1/100th, I just need to 100th or whatever, I just need to move that decimal place over how many spots? 2, just like in the very first problem. So I look at my 88 and I say 1, 2, right? That's the whole point. The whole point of doing these tens and 1% is it's cheating. I don't know if cheating, but we're going to use what's nice and easy to our advantage, right? So you could pick the craziest number ever, 1,413. Well, what's 10% of that, right? 10%. Well, 10%, remember, is 1/10. And 1/10 means that I'm going to take that decimal place and I'm going to move it over one spot to get 141.3. 141.3 is 10% or 1/10 of 1,413. Right? What would be 1% of that? 1% of that, right? Or 1%. 1% of that, I'm sorry, or 1/100th is just taking that 1,413 and doing what? Moving it over 2 places to get 14.13. So if I had 1,413 different items and I need 10% of those items, 1/100th of those items, right? It's like taking that 1,413, chopping it up into 100 equal pieces. How much does each piece get? It gets 14.13, or 14 and 13/100ths. There, right? All right. Now, why did I bring this up? Because now it's time for us to make this we have these last two problems to make it easier, right? What is 30% of 37? Well, what I'm going to do is I can look for 30% of 37. Whoops, bump that down below here. 37, right? I could do that, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to find 10%. Right? What is 10%? Well, of 37. Well, we just moved that decimal place over, right? We moved that decimal place over, and it's 3.7. But Mr. Crone, how do we get the 30%? Well, 30% is just 3 10%. 3 of these 10%. So I take 3.7 and then I multiply it by 3. 1, 2, 3 times 3 is 9 plus 2, that's an 11, right? 11.1. Let me create a small a thing here to just kind of show this a little bit, right? We've saw these earlier in the year. This is 0%. And here's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Let's do that. 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And I'm just going to shift some of this over for me here. There we go. That worked out all right. All right, so here's 10%, 20%, 30%, 40, and then there's 50, and we're going to go all the way up, and here's 100%, right? Well, here is the 0, and here is 37, right? I'm just taking that 37, and I divided that into 10 pieces. That's what 10% of that is, right? So this piece is 3.7. Well, to get all the way up to 30%, right, I'm just going to jump over, right? Multiply that by 3. So the 3.7, if I wanted 20%, I'm just going to double that. 3.7 plus 3.7, right? That's going to be 7.4. And I should move that. It's kind of in my way, isn't it? A little too much. And if I did another 3.7 plus 7.4, what do I get? Well, there I go. I get my 11.1. my 11.1, which is what I wanted here, right? So what I'm trying to do is we're just doing simple percents so that we can find these somewhat more difficult ones. But I'm trying to do this so that you can do some of this in your head, right? So what's 40% of 83, right? What's 40% of 83? All right, so what is 10%? Oops, still trying to erase. What is 10%? I'm bumping colors on the fly. That is crazy. 10% of 83. Well, 10% is 8.3. Right? 10% is 8.3, right? Here's my chart. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, right? There's my 100%. Here's my 0%. There's 10%, right? And 10% is 8.3 of, should put my 83 here, right? So I'm taking that 83, I've broken into those 10 pieces. But what's 40% of that? Well, we're just going to increase and bump up until we get to 40%, right? So let's take that 8.3 and let's multiply it by 4, because I have 10 of those, I have 4 of those 10%, right? 2, carry that 1. 4 times 8 is 32, plus 1 is 33. Now I need to put in my decimal place because I have 1 decimal place here. I move over here. So this becomes 33.2. There it is. There's 40% of 83. I found the 10%, moved up to 83. Or I'm sorry, found the 10%, moved up to 40%. Okay? So what I want you to do is just work on moving those decimal places around to get those 1% and 2%. Once you do that, if you need to, you can adjust and find the 30, 40% or anything like that. That's it. Please be sure to show your work while you're doing that.